Hello everyone. Today I want to tell you some stories about cheating. The first story, The Scent of Lilies, her favorite, did little to soothe Amelia's anxiety. She smoothed the crisp linen tablecloth, her fingers tracing the delicate embroidery, a pattern she'd chosen with such care when she and David had renovated their dining room. It was perfect, just like everything else she strived for. Tonight was their 10th anniversary, and she was determined to make it flawless. David was late. Traffic, he'd texted, a curt message that did little to quell the rising tide of unease in her chest. He'd been distant lately, consumed by his work, a consultant who advised struggling businesses. Or so he said. The doorbell chimed, and Amelia forced a smile. He was here, but it wasn't David. It was a young woman with fiery red hair pulled back in a messy bun. She held a large portfolio close to her chest. "Mrs. Hayes? I'm Clara, the photographer. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I think Mr. Hayes might have accidentally given me your address." Amelia's forced smile faltered. "Photographer?" David didn't mention. Clara shifted her weight uncomfortably. "He hired me for a small project. Corporate headshots for some of his clients, I believe. I just needed him to sign off on the final invoice." Amelia invited Clara in, her movements mechanical, the lilies suddenly suffocating. She offered Clara a glass of water, her eyes scanning the young woman's nervous energy, the way her gaze darted around the impeccably decorated room. "It's a beautiful home," Clara said, finally meeting Amelia's gaze. "Thank you." The words felt like sandpaper in Amelia's throat. Clara opened her portfolio, and a flood of images spilled into the warm, inviting space, bland, corporate portraits, just as Clara had described. But amongst them, tucked away almost as an afterthought, was a single, unmounted print. It was a photograph of David, not a stiff, professional portrait. This was David laughing, unguarded, his eyes crinkling at the corners, a genuine smile that Amelia hadn't seen in months. He was standing in a sun-drenched field, a wildflower clutched in his hand, the light catching the subtle silver in his hair. He looked happy. And younger. Her stomach churned. Something felt deeply, irrevocably wrong. "That's..." Amelia's voice trailed off. Clara hesitated, her face flushing a delicate pink. He asked me to take a few personal shots. For a gift," he said. Amelia reached for the photograph, her fingers trembling. A gift for whom? Clara's silence was deafening. She looked down at her hands, her fingernails bitten to the quick. "Mrs. Hayes, I really shouldn't say." The blood drained from Amelia's face. She knew. She knew with a certainty that pierced her like a shard of glass. It wasn't the photograph itself, but the way David looked in it, the unguarded joy that he reserved for someone else. The key turned in the lock. David was home. He walked in, his tie loosened, his face etched with a fabricated weariness. "Amelia, darling, I'm sore." He stopped short, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Clara, her portfolio, the photograph in Amelia's hand, the air crackled with tension. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the faint ticking of the antique clock in the hallway. David's fabricated weariness dissolved, replaced by a look of naked panic. Amelia looked at him, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The lilies, with their cloying sweetness, seemed to mock her. "Who is this, David?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. He stammered, a jumble of excuses tumbling from his lips. "Lies." Lies she could see through with painful clarity. Clara, bless her hesitant soul, interrupted. "Mr. Hayes, I can explain." Amelia raised her hand, stopping her. This wasn't about Clara. This was about David and his lies, about the carefully constructed facade of their marriage crumbling before her eyes. Turning to David, she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "The lilies are beautiful, but they don't seem to be masking the stench of your betrayal." She placed the photograph on the table, the image of his carefree smile staring back at them, a bitter testament to their broken vows. "It was a gift, all right. A gift of truth, unwelcome and devastating. As David opened his mouth to speak, to offer another flimsy excuse, Amelia simply walked away. The anniversary dinner, the perfectly set table, the decade of carefully curated memories, were reduced to ashes. Dinner could wait. Tonight, she needed to breathe, to process, to decide what kind of future she wanted. A future that, for the first time in a long time, didn't include David. She had a photographer to thank, albeit indirectly, for finally opening her eyes to the truth, a truth she had, perhaps, been too blind to see for far too long. And maybe, just maybe, amidst the pain, there was a tiny seed of hope, a chance for her to find her own sun-drenched field, and to learn to smile again, a genuine smile, not for the cameras, but for herself. The second story, the rain hammered against the panoramic windows of their mountaintop home, mirroring the tempest brewing inside Eleanor. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting flickering shadows that danced across the expensive, meticulously chosen furniture. It was supposed to be idyllic, a sanctuary built on years of shared dreams and unwavering devotion. But tonight, the only thing unwavering was the guilt twisting in her gut. Eleanor watched her husband, David, stirring a pot of chili, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a good man, solid, dependable, the bedrock of their life together. He'd built a successful software company, and through his hard work, they had this beautiful home, financial security, and a life that many envied. And she, in her selfishness, had shattered the foundation that it had started subtly. Their conversations had become routine, their intimacy predictable. David, always focused on his business, had become less attentive, less present. She'd found herself craving something more, a spark that had dimmed over the years. Then she met Dr. Ben Carter. He was the local veterinarian, gentle, kind, with a quiet empathy that radiated from his warm brown eyes. He cared for their aging golden retriever, Gus, with a tenderness that made Eleanor's heart ache. He listened intently when she spoke, his gaze lingering just a little too long. The affair had been a gradual slide, a series of seemingly harmless encounters that escalated into stolen moments of passion and whispered confessions in his small, cluttered office, surrounded by the comforting smells of antiseptic and animal dander. It was a desperate attempt to recapture a lost part of herself, a foolish yearning for the feeling of being seen, truly seen. Now, the thrill was gone, replaced by a crippling weight of regret. She saw the love in David's eyes, the genuine effort he made to be a good husband, and the shame was unbearable. David turned, a warm smile lighting up his face. "Smells amazing, Elle. Hungry?" Eleanor forced a smile, her throat tight. "Starving." During dinner, she watched him, noticing the fine lines around his eyes, the weariness etched on his face. He deserved better. He deserved the honesty she had so readily withheld. She tried to eat, but the chili tasted like ashes in her mouth. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She put down her spoon, her hands trembling. "David," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." He looked at her, his expression softening with concern. "What is it, honey? You seem upset." The words caught in her throat. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment where her carefully constructed world would come crashing down around her. I've been unfaithful," she choked out, the confession ripping through the silence like a thunderclap. The color drained from David's face. He stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. The warmth in his gaze turned to ice, the love replaced with a chilling emptiness. "What?" he managed, his voice hoarse. Eleanor's tears began to fall, hot and heavy. She told him everything, the gradual dissatisfaction, the allure of Dr. Carter, the guilt that had consumed her. She spared herself nothing, laying bare the ugly truth of her betrayal. The silence that followed was deafening. David didn't scream, didn't shout, didn't even cry. He simply stared at her, his face a mask of shock and pain. Finally, he spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. Who was it?" Eleanor hesitated, the name sticking in her throat. Ben Carter." The silence returned, heavier than before. David stood up, his movements stiff and mechanical. He walked to the window and stood there, his back to her, watching the relentless rain. "Get out," he said, his voice barely audible. Eleanor gasped, her heart shattering into a million pieces. "David, please. I'm so sorry. Can't we talk? Can't we try to fix this?" He didn't turn around. "Get out. I don't want to see you. Not now, not ever." With trembling hands, Eleanor packed a bag, her entire life reduced to a handful of necessities. As she walked out the door, she looked back at David, still standing silhouetted against the rain-streaked window. He didn't move. She stepped out into the storm, the rain washing over her, mirroring the tears streaming down her face. She had destroyed everything. Her marriage, her home, her life. All for a fleeting moment of passion, a desperate attempt to feel alive. As she drove away, leaving everything she had ever known behind, Eleanor knew that the hardest part wasn't leaving David or the life they had built together. It was facing the reality that she had become a woman she didn't recognize, a woman who had traded love and loyalty for a lie. And now, she would have to live with the consequences, alone, in the wreckage of her own making, forever haunted by the storm she had unleashed. The rain continued to fall, a relentless reminder of the heartache and regret that would forever cling to her like the scent of wet earth and broken promises. The veterinarian's office, no doubt, was still open, but Eleanor knew she could never return. Her life, as she knew it, was dead. The third story, the rain was a pathetic fallacy, mirroring the storm brewing within Amelia. Each drop hammered against the windowpane, blurring the tidy suburban landscape into an indistinct watercolor of gray and green. Inside, the scent of rosemary chicken, a dish she usually made to celebrate Fridays with David, clung to the air, now thick with unspoken tension. David, bless his oblivious heart, was in the living room, deciphering some esoteric equation from his dog-eared copy of A Brief History of Time. He was a creature of habit, predictable and comforting, like a worn-out armchair. That's what Amelia had loved about him once. Now, that predictability felt like a cage. It had started innocently enough, during the PDA fundraiser. A silent auction item, private tutoring sessions with Dr. Thorne, the physics teacher at their daughter Lily's school. Lily was struggling, and Amelia, desperate to help, had bid, winning easily. Dr. Thorne was different. Where David was grounded in the tangible world, Thorne existed in a realm of quarks and quantum entanglement. He spoke of the universe with a reverence that ignited something dormant within Amelia, a spark of intellectual curiosity she hadn't realized was extinguished. The tutoring sessions were supposed to be about Lily, about her grasping the complexities of momentum and gravity. But slowly, subtly, they became about Amelia. Thorne saw her, not just as a wife, a mother, a perpetually busy woman, but as someone with a mind yearning for connection, for stimulation, for something beyond the routine. One rain-soaked afternoon, after a particularly grueling session with Lily, Thorne had offered her a cup of tea in his office. The air crackled with unspoken understanding. He had quoted Einstein, something about gravity not being responsible for people falling in love. And then, it had happened. A kiss, clumsy and desperate, that tasted of forbidden fruit and the promise of escape. The affair, if it could be called that, was brief, intense, and utterly devastating. It was a wildfire that burned through her carefully constructed life, leaving behind ashes of guilt and confusion. She loved David, she truly did. He was her anchor, her best friend, the father of her child. But he didn't see her. Not the way Thorne did. Now, as David hummed softly along to classical music, oblivious to the silent earthquake shaking her soul, Amelia knew she had to tell him. The guilt was a suffocating weight, pressing down on her with each tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She walked into the living room, the scent of rosemary chicken suddenly cloying and unbearable. David looked up, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Honey," she began, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something." He smiled, a genuine, loving smile that pierced her to the core. "Just let me finish this thought. I think I've finally cracked this gravitational lensing problem." He turned back to his book, lost in the intricate dance of equations. Amelia stood there, frozen, the words caught in her throat. Could she really shatter this fragile peace? Could she trade the comfort of his ignorance for the searing pain of truth? She opened her mouth to speak, but the phone rang. David answered it, his face lighting up. Lily. How was the movie? Oh, really? Did Dr. Thorne go with you all? That's fantastic, honey. Yes, tell him thank you for me. He hung up, beaming. Lily says Dr. Thorne took them all to see some science documentary. Apparently, he's a really great guy. She's finally starting to understand physics. The rain outside intensified, mirroring the tempest raging inside Amelia. The weight of her betrayal pressed down on her, heavier than ever before. She stared at David, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp, a picture of contented innocence. The truth, she realized, was a dangerous thing. And sometimes, the hardest truth to face was the one about yourself. She was a coward. She couldn't do it. Everything okay, honey? David asked, his eyes finally meeting hers. Amelia forced a smile, a fragile, brittle thing. Everything's fine, she whispered. Just fine. The rosemary chicken sat untouched on their plates. The rain continued to fall. And the secret, like a malignant tumor, continued to grow within Amelia's soul, silently poisoning everything she held dear. The universe, Dr. Thorne had said, was a cold and indifferent place. Amelia was starting to believe him. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was now trapped, not by love, but by the terrifying force of her own choice. The fourth story, the sterile scent of antiseptic always clung to Amelia, a ghostly reminder of Dr. Harding's office. Not the white coat and practiced smile, but the humming drill, the cool metal instruments, and the breathless, stolen moments that had become a forbidden ritual. She inhaled, trying to banish the smell, but it was everywhere, a phantom clinging to her favorite scarf, a subliminal message in the steam of her morning coffee. Amelia was a curator, surrounded by the quiet dignity of history. Her marriage to David, a historian specializing in ancient civilizations, had seemed equally stable, a carefully preserved artifact of mutual respect and shared intellectual pursuits. But lately, David felt more like an exhibit, admired from afar but no longer truly touched. The dull ache in her tooth had been a blessing, an excuse to escape the predictable rhythm of their life. Dr. Harding, with his disarming charm and playful banter, had ignited a flame she thought long extinguished. What began as nervous laughter during appointments morphed into prolonged glances, then tentative touches, and finally, a reckless plunge into an affair as sharp and painful as a root canal without anesthetic. The guilt gnawed at her. Every shared glance with David, every mundane conversation, became a theater of deception. She found herself overcompensating, showering him with affection, cooking his favorite meals, but the emptiness in his eyes seemed to deepen with each forced display point. One evening, David surprised her with a reservation at their favorite Italian restaurant. He'd rarely been so attentive lately, and Amelia's heart hammered with a mixture of hope and dread. Was this a sign he knew? Over candlelight, David told her about his latest research, his voice laced with the familiar passion. He spoke about the fragility of empires, how even the most enduring structures could crumble under the weight of internal decay. Amelia listened, guilt coiling tighter in her stomach. He was talking about more than just history. I've been so absorbed, he said, finally meeting her gaze. I haven't been paying attention to you, to us. I've been distant. Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes. She opened her mouth to confess, to spill the truth like a broken veil, but the words caught in her throat. It's okay, David, she whispered, the lie tasting like ash. We all have our moments. He reached across the table and took her hand, his touch cool and reassuring. I want to change that. I want to reconnect. I want us to be us again. That night, Amelia lay awake, the weight of her betrayal crushing her. She envisioned David, a meticulous archaeologist, carefully brushing away layers of dust only to find a gaping fissure in their foundation. The image was unbearable. The next morning, she called Dr. Harding. The conversation was brief, stilted. She told him it was over. He didn't argue, didn't plead. He simply said, "I understand," and the line went dead. The antiseptic smell still haunted her, but its power was waning. It was replaced by the sharp, lingering scent of regret, a deeper, more abiding pain. Weeks turned into months. Amelia dedicated herself to rebuilding the trust she had shattered. She listened to David, really listened. She rediscovered the joy in their shared passions, the comfort in their quiet companionship. She focused on the us David longed for, erasing the ghost of the him that had threatened to destroy it all. One day, while cleaning out a drawer, she found a small, velvet box. Inside lay a delicate silver necklace, a replica of an ancient Egyptian amulet. "I was going to give this to you on our anniversary," David said, appearing in the doorway. "But then, things weren't so good. I wasn't sure if it was the right time." He placed the necklace around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin. "It's beautiful," Amelia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "It represents protection. I want to protect you, Amelia. I want to protect us." Looking into his eyes, Amelia knew that the scars of her betrayal would always remain, a faint etching on the surface of their marriage. But she also knew that love, even after being wounded, could heal, could rebuild, could even, in its own way, endure. And, perhaps, that was the greatest artifact of all. The ability to forgive, to rebuild, to choose love over destruction, even in the face of irreversible damage. The task ahead was not to erase the past, but to curate a future worthy of their shared history.